I'm 68 years old, and for the last 25 years, I've been carrying a secret that would make most people think I've lost my mind. In 1999, I found a newborn creature in the woods behind my cabin in northern Michigan. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a wolf. It was something else entirely, something that shouldn't exist. I raised him like he was my own son. For 25 years, we lived in peace. He grew tall, strong, 7 feet, 350 pounds. But then 3 weeks ago, everything changed. A trespasser found us, the man escaped, and within days, federal agents showed up at my property line. Now they're hunting him. They want to euthanize him for experimentation and science. I have journals documenting every stage of his growth. I have photographs hidden in my cabin, and I have maybe 72 hours before they find him. This is my confession before they take everything. My name is Thomas Calder. I'm 68 years old, and I've spent 34 years working in wildlife biology and conservation. I've tracked wolves across the Upper Peninsula, documented bear populations for the DNR, consulted on endangered species recovery programs. I thought I understood the limits of what was possible in these forests. I was catastrophically wrong. 3 weeks ago, my entire world collapsed. A county surveyor stumbled onto my property unannounced and saw something he shouldn't have seen. Within 48 hours, there were federal vehicles on the access roads. Within a week, I had agents knocking on my door with questions about unusual wildlife activity in the area. They were polite, professional, careful not to accuse me of anything directly. But I knew what they wanted. They want him. Silas, the creature I've raised for 25 years. The family I chose when I had nothing else left. I'm not dying, not yet anyway, but I'm writing this now because I don't know how much time we have left. The agents are setting up a perimeter. They've got thermal imaging, motion sensors, trail cameras covering every square mile within a 10-mile radius of my property. They're treating this like a manhunt for a dangerous animal. They're not entirely wrong, but they're not right either. I bought this property in 1987, right after my father's suicide. Found him in his garage on a Tuesday morning, engine running, garden hose taped to the exhaust. My marriage didn't survive that year. Sarah left in November, took the dog, told me I'd become someone she didn't recognize. She was right. I had. I wanted isolation, wanted to disappear into work and solitude where grief couldn't find me as easily. The cabin sits on 340 acres of mixed hardwood forest, 5 miles from the nearest neighbor. Perfect for someone who wanted to be left alone. Perfect for what came later, though I didn't know that yet. Before 1999, I knew the local folklore. Every region has its stories. Bigfoot in the Pacific Northwest, the Jersey Devil out east. Here in Michigan, people talked about the Dogman, 7-foot-tall wolfmen walking upright through the forest. I dismissed it all as urban legend, the kind of campfire nonsense that gets embellished with each retelling. In wildlife biology, we deal with facts, evidence, measurable data, not folklore. That dismissal haunts me now. All the warning signs were there in the stories. Patterns of sightings. Consistent physical descriptions across decades. Credible witnesses who had nothing to gain from lying. I should have paid attention. I thought I understood limits. I was wrong. October 12, 1999. Dawn. Freezing rain coming down at a steady drizzle. Temperature holding at 34 degrees. I was 5 miles from my cabin, checking a limestone outcropping where I'd seen bear sign the week before. The rock formation created natural shelters, shallow caves that animals used for denning. That's where I found him. The tracks led me there first. 18 inches long, 7 inches wide at the widest point. Bipedal stride pattern, approximately 6 feet between steps. My brain tried to categorize them as something known. Bear tracks, maybe, except the proportions were wrong. Bears walk on the flat of their feet. These showed distinct heel strikes. Weight distribution patterns that suggested upright locomotion, not quadrupedal movement. I followed them to the outcropping. That's when I heard it, a sound like a puppy crying, high-pitched and desperate. The shelter was shallow, maybe 4 feet deep, protected from the rain by the overhang, and there, in the back, was an infant. He was about 18 inches long, covered in matted gray fur. His eyes were still closed, but his hands, God, his hands, 5 digits. Elongated, yes, but 5 distinct fingers with an opposable thumb. I picked him up, felt his tiny heart racing against my palm. The head was vaguely canine, the muzzle short and underdeveloped. The ears were pointed, folded flat against the skull. I thought it was a bear cub, I said out loud to no one, but the proportions didn't match. The hind legs were too long, too thick at the femur, built for upright movement, not just running on all fours. I spent 20 minutes in that shelter, my mind working through possibilities. Deformed wolf, hybrid anomaly, some genetic mutation I didn't understand. But deep down, in the part of my brain that still listened to instinct instead of training, I knew what I was looking at. This wasn't a bear. This wasn't a wolf. I searched the area for the mother, found tracks leading away from the shelter, heading north. They were larger, maybe 22 inches long, deeper impressions suggesting significant weight. But the trail disappeared into a creek bed, and I lost it in the water. I spent 2 hours searching, found nothing. No den, no body, no sign she was coming back. I had 3 options: leave the infant to die of exposure, report it to my superiors and risk exposure, or take it home. My training told me to document and report immediately. That's protocol. That's what 34 years of fieldwork had taught me. I wrapped him in my jacket and carried him to my truck. What the hell was I thinking? That first night, I built a makeshift containment in my shed. Heat lamp positioned 3 feet above a nest of old blankets. Temperature regulation was critical. Newborns can't thermoregulate effectively. I kept the ambient temperature around 85 degrees, checking every 2 hours through the night. Feeding him was guesswork. I heated goat's milk to body temperature, added raw egg for protein, used an eyedropper to get it into his mouth. He ate hungrily, his tiny mouth working, those strange little hands gripping the dropper with surprising coordination. I named him that night Silas, after my grandfather, a man who understood the value of keeping secrets, of protecting things the world didn't need to know about. Why didn't I report him? Fear, partly. Fear of what exposure would mean. Government seizure, laboratory dissection, my career destroyed for concealing the find. But there was something else, too. Something I'm not proud of. I was lonely. Had been lonely since my father died, since Sarah left. This creature needed me. For the first time in 2 years, something depended on me for survival. By the 3rd day, I documented his basic physiology. Eyes still closed, but responsive to sound and touch. Body temperature stabilized around 100 Mundrup, slightly higher than canine normal. Carnivorous teeth already visible beneath the gums, sharp little points that would develop rapidly. The hands were fully functional even at this stage, gripping reflex strong, thumb opposition clear. The first intelligence markers appeared within a week. Eye contact once his eyes opened. Not the blank stare of a newborn puppy, but focused attention. He tracked my movements across the room. When I spoke, he oriented toward my voice. Vocalizations weren't random. They had structure, variation, seemed to serve communicative functions beyond simple distress calls. I took a week off work, told my supervisor I had the flu. Spent that time establishing feeding schedules, monitoring his health, watching him grow at a rate that terrified me. By day 7, he'd gained 2 pounds. His eyes had opened fully, amber-colored, bright and alert in the lamplight. "What am I doing?" I asked him one night, sitting on the floor of the shed at 2 a.m. He was curled in his nest, making soft chirping sounds in his sleep. What the hell am I doing? But I already knew I wasn't going to stop. The emergency actions became routine: feeding bottles every 4 hours, temperature monitoring, weight checks, recording every developmental milestone in journals I kept hidden in a locked cabinet. I was documenting something impossible, and I couldn't tell a single person about it. The first real doubt hit me on day 10. Silas had nearly doubled in size. The growth rate was exponential, far beyond anything I'd seen in canines or bears. At this rate, he'd outgrow the shed within months. What was I supposed to do then? Build a bigger enclosure? And then what? Keep building bigger cages for the rest of his life? I didn't have answers. I just kept going, one day at a time, telling myself I'd figure it out. The growth rate was exponential. By 1 month, Silas was the size of a medium dog, maybe 30 pounds. His coordination improved daily. At 6 weeks, he could stand upright on his hind legs, though he preferred moving on all fours. The hands developed faster than any other feature. By 2 months, he'd figured out how to open the shed latch from the inside. I watched him work at it for 20 minutes, trying different approaches until the mechanism clicked. That's when I reinforced everything, added deadbolts, replaced the wooden door with steel-reinforced panels, built an interior pen with chain-link fencing anchored in concrete. My work at the lumber yard suffered. I started leaving exactly at 5 p.m. every day. Couldn't explain why. Couldn't stay for overtime or after-work drinks with colleagues. "You're never around anymore," my supervisor said one Friday. "Everything okay at home?" "Fine," I lied. "Just got a lot going on." Behavioral development accelerated alongside physical growth. By month 3, he knew his name. I could call Silas and he'd orient toward me immediately, ears swiveling to track my voice. He was curious, intelligent, constantly testing his environment. I'd find him examining tools I'd left in the shed, turning them over in those strange hands, studying how they worked. The bond formed faster than I expected. By 4 months, Silas would press against the fence when I entered the shed, making soft vocalizations that sounded almost like purring. When I sat on the floor, he'd reach through the gaps to touch my hand, his clawed fingers surprisingly gentle. It wasn't like raising a dog. It was like raising a child, a strange, impossible child who grew too fast and understood too much. I started missing family gatherings. My sister called less frequently. "You're becoming a hermit," she said during our last conversation. "Dad would hate seeing you like this." I didn't tell her that I'd found purpose again, that for the first time since Dad died, I woke up with something to look forward to. Strange, impossible, but real. By 6 months, Silas was 4 feet tall, standing upright, probably 80 pounds. His strength was incredible. I watched him snap a 2-inch tree branch with one hand, not chewing it, gripping and twisting until the wood splintered. The muscles in his shoulders and back were developing abnormally fast, dense ropes of tissue beneath the coarse gray fur. Sleep deprivation became chronic. I'd wake every few hours, convinced something had gone wrong, that he'd escaped or hurt himself. The nightmares started then, too. Dreams of him growing too large for containment, breaking free, being seen by neighbors or hunters. I was becoming part of his world. The question was whether I could survive what that meant. By his first birthday, Silas had reached 6 feet tall, standing upright, approximately 180 pounds. The shed was no longer adequate. I built a reinforced enclosure in the basement, steel-reinforced walls, ventilation system, drain in the concrete floor for cleaning. The construction took 3 months of weekends. I told neighbors I was building a workshop. His diet had shifted entirely to raw meat. I bought whole deer carcasses from local processors, told them I was feeding sled dogs. A full-grown deer lasted him maybe 5 days. The feeding process required careful choreography. I'd slide the meat through a reinforced slot, lock it immediately, watch through tempered glass as he fed. The efficiency was startling. He stripped carcasses to bare bone within hours, using those hands to manipulate joints, separate muscle groups, crack bones for marrow. But the basement felt wrong. Silas paced constantly, wore paths in the concrete. He'd press his face against the observation window, amber eyes tracking birds outside, squirrels, anything that moved. The confinement was taking a toll. At 13 months, I made the decision that would define the next 24 years. I started taking him outside. We went at night, always between 2 and 4 a.m. when the world was asleep. I'd lead him into the forest, watch him experience trees and wind and open space for the first time since infancy. The transformation was immediate. He'd stand on his hind legs, head tilted back, breathing deep, learning his territory. The first few excursions, I kept him on a reinforced cable, paranoid he'd run, disappear into the forest, leave me behind. But he never did. He'd explore, range maybe 100 yards out, then circle back to me, checking in, making sure I was still there. By 18 months, I stopped using the cable. We'd walk together through the forest, Silas moving silently on all fours, occasionally standing upright to scan the horizon. He learned the property boundaries without being taught, seemed to understand instinctively that crossing certain lines meant danger. Environmental changes became visible. Deer trails shifted away from areas we frequented. Coyotes that used to den near the north boundary disappeared entirely. Smaller predators, foxes, weasels, vanished from the area. The radius of influence was too large for a single creature, but somehow the forest knew he was there. I started bringing books on our walks, reading to him while he explored. I know how that sounds. But he'd stop and listen, head cocked, as if trying to understand the words. By year 1, I was convinced Silas understood more than he could express. His eyes tracked not just movement, but intention. He watched my hands, my shoulders, my head angle, reading body language with frightening accuracy. My social life had become non-existent. I was 43 years old with no friends, no romantic prospects, no existence outside my job and this nightly ritual. I'd started dating someone briefly, Patricia, a teacher from Marquette. She wanted to see the property, spend evenings together. I made excuses until she stopped calling. "I hope whatever you're protecting is worth it," she said before hanging up for the last time. I looked down at Silas sleeping by the fireplace. I'd started letting him in the cabin at night and knew she was right. He was worth it. Every sacrifice, every lie, every lonely year. That was year 1. I thought the hardest part was behind me. I was wrong. Adolescence brought rapid changes. Year 2 saw Silas reach 240 pounds, nearly 7 feet tall. The musculature filled out, transforming him from gangly adolescent to apex predator. His face matured, the muzzle elongating, filling with teeth designed for tearing and crushing. The canines were 3 inches long. I watched him crack a deer femur with his jaws, the bone splintering like dry wood. The intelligence markers became more sophisticated. Tool use emerged, using rocks to crack nuts, using sticks to probe gaps in walls, testing for weaknesses. He figured out how to turn doorknobs when he was 2.5. I came home one day to find him sitting on my porch, having let himself out of the cabin. He looked at me like he was waiting for praise. "You can't do that," I told him. "If someone sees you—" He understood. I know he did. The next day, I installed locks he couldn't manipulate. Yet. By year 3, our routine was established. I'd work during the day, return home at 5 p.m. exactly. We'd spend the evening together, me reading or working on cabin repairs, Silas either in the basement or, increasingly, loose in the house. At 2 a.m., we'd go for our walk. 2 to 3 hours through the forest, covering miles of territory. He never vocalized during these walks unless alerting me to danger. A black bear once wandered too close. Silas positioned himself between me and the threat, made a sound I'd never heard before, low, resonant, more felt than heard. The bear ran. I don't think I've ever seen a bear move that fast. People in town started asking questions. Why did I hunt so much? Why was I always buying meat from processors? Why did my property have such elaborate fencing? I told them I was private, that I valued my solitude. Most people accepted that. Michigan forests are full of hermits and survivalists. I was just one more. The near-exposure incident happened in year 4. A group of hikers got turned around, ended up on my property asking for directions. It was 4 p.m., an hour before I normally got home. Silas was supposed to be in the basement, but I'd left the door unlocked that morning. Rushing, distracted. I pulled up to find 3 hikers standing in my driveway, looking at my cabin with strange expressions. "You hear that?" one of them asked. "Sounds like something big moving around inside." My blood went cold. "Old house," I said. "Pipes settling." "That's not pipes," another said. "That's something heavy, like footsteps." I gave them directions back to the trail, watched until they disappeared into the forest. Then I went inside, heart pounding. Silas was in the living room, pressed against the wall farthest from the windows. He'd known to hide. After all these years, he understood the danger. I sat down on the floor next to him, and he pressed his head against my shoulder. We stayed like that for an hour, both of us shaking. Year 5 brought complete isolation. I turned down a research position in Lansing that would have advanced my career significantly. Couldn't explain to the department head why I couldn't relocate. "You're throwing your career away," he told me. For what? To be alone in the woods? Not alone, I thought. Never alone. My health began declining. Arthritis in my hands from years of hauling heavy loads, sleep deprivation from the nightmares and the 2 a.m. walks, blood pressure issues from chronic stress. I was 47 years old, looked 60, felt older, but I had Silas. And that was enough. Full maturity arrived around year 6. Silas topped out at 7.5 feet tall, standing upright, 320 pounds of muscle and bone and predatory efficiency. He moved with liquid grace despite his size, silent as smoke through the forest. I'd watched him hunt a few times, never allowed him to kill on the property, but in the deep woods he'd occasionally take a deer. The efficiency was terrifying. He'd stalk for hours, patient and methodical, then strike with explosive speed. The deer never knew what hit it, but he was gentle with me, always. Those massive hands with their 4-inch claws would touch my shoulder with impossible delicacy. When I was sick with the flu in year 7, he stayed close, bringing me water, watching over me like I'd watched over him as an infant. The role reversal wasn't lost on me. The emotional bond deepened in ways I couldn't explain to anyone. Silas was my family, my son, my friend, my companion. We'd sit on the porch in the evenings, me in my chair, him on the floor beside me, and just exist together. Comfortable silence, mutual understanding. He started demonstrating more complex reasoning. In year 8, I watched him use a fallen branch as a lever to move a boulder that was blocking a trail we frequently used. Not random tool use, deliberate problem solving. Another time, he brought me a dead rabbit he'd found, laid it at my feet. When I examined it, I found it had been killed by poison. He was warning me, showing me there was danger on the property. "Thank you," I told him, and he made a soft huffing sound that I'd learned meant acknowledgement. People who think animals can't communicate have never spent time with an intelligent creature. Silas and I had entire conversations without words, a tilt of the head, a specific vocalization, the way he'd position himself. We understood each other perfectly. Years, 9 through 15, blurred together. The routine became life, work, home, evenings together, nighttime walks. Seasons changed. Silas's muzzle grayed slightly around year 12. I turned 57, my own hair completely silver, my body breaking down from decades of manual labor and stress. We grew old together. I'd long since stopped thinking about what came next. This was my life now. This was my purpose. Protecting this impossible creature, giving him the closest thing to a normal existence he could have. It wasn't perfect. He deserved to be wild, to find a mate, to live among his own kind if there were others out there. But that wasn't possible. Discovery meant death. At least this way, he was safe. Or so I thought. The years accumulated like snow. Year 16 brought my retirement from the DNR. I told them I wanted to focus on private consulting, but really, I just wanted more time with Silas. No more rushing home at 5 p.m., no more pretending to care about census reports and population models when the most important creature in my life couldn't be documented or counted. We expanded our territory during these years. Our nighttime walks covered a 15-mile radius, Silas leading the way through terrain I'd never explored despite living here for decades. He knew paths invisible to human eyes, game trails and water sources, and sheltered areas where we'd rest before heading home. In year 18, something remarkable happened. We were deep in the forest, maybe 12 miles from the cabin, when Silas stopped abruptly. His entire body went rigid, ears swiveling, nose testing the air. Then he made a sound I'd never heard before, a long, low vocalization that carried through the trees. And something answered. The return call came from perhaps a mile away. Similar vocal structure, but higher pitched. Female, I thought. Silas took a step toward the sound, then stopped, looked back at me. The conflict in his eyes was heartbreaking, instinct pulling him one direction, loyalty holding him back. Go, I told him. It's okay, go. He didn't. He stood there for another minute, listening to that distant call, then turned and walked back to my side. Chose me over his own kind. The weight of that choice has haunted me ever since. Year 20 brought health scares. My blood pressure medication stopped being effective. Had a mild heart attack in July, spent 3 days in the hospital telling doctors I lived alone, no one to call, no emergency contacts. Silas waited for me. I know because when I got home, the cabin was exactly as I'd left it, except for the worn path he'd paced in front of the door. The realization hit me then. What happens to him when I die? I was 64 years old. He was 20. If his species aged like large canines, he might have another 10 to 15 years. Who would take care of him? Who could I possibly trust with this secret? I started writing everything down. Journals documenting his development, his behaviors, his needs, photographs stored in fireproof containers, DNA samples I'd collected over the years, carefully preserved. If something happened to me, someone would need to know. My nephew James was studying biology at Michigan State. Smart kid, compassionate. Maybe he could understand. Maybe he could continue what I'd started. Years 21 through 24 were peaceful. As peaceful as this strange life could be. Silas settled into what I recognized as mature contentment, less restless, more settled. We'd spend hours on the porch together, watching the forest, existing in comfortable silence. He'd rest his head on my knee, and I'd scratch behind his ears, and for those moments everything felt almost normal. I convinced myself we could do this forever. Keep living this way, year after year, until one of us died and the other figured out how to go on alone. I convinced myself we were safe. That 25 years of careful isolation had proven we could maintain this indefinitely. I was wrong. November 3rd, 2024. 2:47 p.m. I was in town getting supplies when my phone rang. Trail camera alert. I had motion sensors covering the access roads, set to notify me of vehicles approaching the property. I checked the camera feed. White truck, county surveyor markings. My blood went cold. I'd been dealing with a boundary dispute with the adjacent property owner. Nothing serious, just some confusion about the property line on the eastern edge. I'd forgotten they were sending someone to survey. The appointment was supposed to be next week. They'd come early. I drove back to the cabin going 20 over the speed limit, hands shaking on the steering wheel. It was 3:15 p.m. Silas would be outside. We'd gotten comfortable over the years, complacent. During daylight hours, he'd roam the property freely, staying within the tree line, but no longer hiding. 25 years without incident had made us both careless. I pulled up to the cabin at 3:32 p.m. The surveyor's truck was parked in my driveway, and standing 50 feet away, at the edge of the clearing, was Silas. The surveyor was out of his truck, equipment in hand, completely frozen, just staring. Silas was standing upright, all 7.5 feet of him, watching this stranger with those amber eyes. "Mr. Calder," the surveyor said without taking his eyes off Silas. His voice was shaking. What is that?" I had maybe 3 seconds to make a decision, 3 seconds to craft a lie that would determine everything. It's a trained bear," I said, "for a wildlife rehabilitation program." "That's not a bear," the surveyor said. "That's not any kind of animal I've ever seen." Silas took a step forward, not aggressive, just curious. The surveyor stumbled backward, dropped his equipment. "It's okay," I said quickly. "He's harmless. He won't hurt you." "I need to leave," the surveyor said. "I need to leave right now." He got in his truck, reversed out of the driveway so fast he nearly hit a tree. I watched him disappear down the access road, dust plume marking his retreat. Silas looked at me. The question in his eyes was clear. Did I do something wrong? "No," I told him. "You didn't do anything wrong. I did. I should have been more careful." I knew what was coming, knew it with absolute certainty. The surveyor had seen too much. The description he'd give would be too specific. 25 years of secrecy destroyed in 30 seconds. I took Silas into the forest that night, deeper than we'd ever gone. Found a cave system I'd explored years ago, doing survey work. Set up supplies, dried meat, water, blankets. "You need to stay here," I told him. "Just for a little while, until I figure this out." He understood something was wrong, pressed close to me, making soft distress sounds. "I'll come back," I promised. "Every day. I won't leave you." I left him there at dawn and went home to wait. The agents showed up 3 days later. 2 black SUVs, 5 people in total. They wore civilian clothes, but had that unmistakable federal bearing, military posture, careful speech, eyes that cataloged everything. "Mr. Calder?" The lead agent was a woman, maybe 40, short, dark hair. "I'm Agent Morrison with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We'd like to ask you some questions about unusual wildlife activity in this area." "I haven't seen anything unusual," I said. "A county surveyor reported seeing what he described as a large bipedal creature on your property 6 days ago. 7 to 8 feet tall, covered in fur, moving upright like a human." "He must have been mistaken," I said. "Probably saw a bear standing on its hind legs. They do that sometimes?" "Mr. Calder, we've interviewed the surveyor extensively. He's a professional with 15 years of field experience. He knows what a bear looks like. What he described was not a bear." They asked to search the property. I refused. They asked if I was harboring any unlicensed wildlife. I said no. They asked if I'd be willing to submit to questioning at their field office. I declined. "We're going to find it, Mr. Calder," Morrison said before leaving. "Whatever's out here, we're going to find it. And when we do, it would be better for everyone if we knew you'd been cooperative." I watched them drive away and knew I was running out of time. The next week was a nightmare. They set up a perimeter. I could see their vehicles on the access roads, thermal imaging equipment visible in the backs. Trail cameras appeared on trees throughout the forest. Professional grade, wireless transmission, nearly invisible. They were building a surveillance net. I visited Silas every night, hiking through terrain I knew they weren't monitoring yet. He was stressed, pacing the cave, not eating properly. The confinement was destroying him. 25 years of relative freedom, and now he was back in a cage. even if this one had stone walls instead of steel. "I'm sorry," I told him on the 8th night. "I'm so sorry. I should have been more careful. I should have protected you better." He pressed his forehead against mine. Forgiveness I didn't deserve. On day 12, Morrison came back. This time with photographs, trail camera images from the forest, thermal signatures showing something large and bipedal moving through the trees. Footprint casts, 18 inches long, clear toe definition, unmistakably not bear or human. "We know it's out there," she said, "and we know you know what it is. Help us, Mr. Calder. Help us bring it in safely. We're not trying to hurt it. We just want to study it, understand what we're dealing with." "And then what?" I asked. "After you study it, what happens then?" She didn't answer immediately. That silence told me everything. "It would be contained in a secure facility," she finally said, "for its own protection and for public safety." "You mean a lab?" I said. "You mean you'd keep it in a cage for the rest of its life, running tests, taking samples, treating it like a specimen instead of a living being?" "Mr. Calder, get off my property." She left, but I knew they weren't giving up. They'd keep searching, keep monitoring, keep tightening the net until Silas made a mistake, or I did. I had to make a choice, turn him over and condemn him to captivity. Run and spend whatever time we had left looking over our shoulders, or find a third option I hadn't thought of yet. I had maybe 72 hours before they found him, maybe less. That night, I sat on my porch with a bottle of whiskey and the journals I'd kept for 25 years. Page after page of documentation, growth measurements, behavioral observations, developmental milestones. A quarter-century of impossible biology recorded in careful handwriting. What was I trying to prove? That he was worth protecting? I already knew that. That he was intelligent, emotional, deserving of life on his own terms? I'd known that since the day I found him. The journals weren't for me. They were for whoever came after. Proof that this had happened, that Silas had existed, that for 25 years we'd been a family. My nephew James called that night. Hadn't heard from him in months. "Uncle Tom, you okay? Mom said federal agents came to the house asking questions about you." "I'm fine," I lied. "They asked if you'd ever mentioned unusual wildlife activity, if you'd ever shown signs of erratic behavior. Uncle Tom, what's going on?" I almost told him, almost explained everything, the discovery, the choice, the 25 years of secrecy. Almost asked for help. But what could he do? Get involved and destroy his own life? No, this was my burden, my choice, my consequence. "Nothing's going on," I said. "Just a misunderstanding. Don't worry about it." After I hung up, I made a decision. I hiked to the cave at 2 a.m., following trails the surveillance grid hadn't covered yet. Silas was waiting, pressed against the back wall, eyes reflecting my flashlight beam. "We're leaving," I told him. "Tonight. We're going north, deep into the wilderness, somewhere they can't follow." I'd spent 34 years studying these forests. I knew areas so remote that survey crews hadn't visited them in decades. Terrain too rough for vehicles, too dense for aerial surveillance. We could disappear, live out whatever time we had left in genuine freedom. Silas stood, understanding. He'd always understood. We packed supplies, everything I could carry, food, water, first aid, the journals, photographs. Left the cabin unlocked. Lights on, truck in the driveway. Make it look like I'd just stepped out. Buy us a few hours. At 3:15 a.m. we started walking north. Silas moved on all fours, silent through the darkness. I followed, using a red light headlamp to preserve night vision. The temperature was 28 degrees, snow starting to fall. Perfect conditions for hiding our trail. We covered 12 miles by dawn. Silas could have gone faster, but he matched my pace, occasionally looking back to make sure I was keeping up. Role reversal, the creature I'd raised now protecting me, guiding me, keeping me safe. We rested in a ravine as the sun came up. I was exhausted, my 68-year-old body not built for this anymore. Silas curled around me, sharing body heat, and I realized this was it. This was how it ended. Not in a lab, not with government agents and specimen containers, but here in the wild together. "I'm sorry I couldn't give you a normal life," I told him. "I'm sorry you never got to find your own kind, start a family, be what you were supposed to be." He made a sound, soft, almost like a sigh, laid his head across my lap, and I understood what he was telling me. This is enough. You are enough. I must have slept. When I woke, the sun was higher, and I could hear helicopters in the distance. The search had expanded. We stayed in the ravine until nightfall, then moved again, heading north and east toward the real wilderness. Canadian border was 60 miles away. If we could cross it, disappear into Ontario's forests, maybe we'd have a chance. But I was slowing down. The hiking, the cold, the stress, my body was failing. By the second night, I could barely walk. Silas stayed close, supporting me when I stumbled, his massive frame a pillar I leaned against. "You should go," I told him. "Leave me here. You'll move faster alone." He didn't. Of course he didn't. On the third day, my heart gave out. I felt it happen. Pressure in my chest, pain radiating down my left arm, the world going gray at the edges. I collapsed against a tree, sliding down into the snow. Silas stood over me, making distressed sounds, pressed his face against mine. I could feel his breath, hot and rapid, see the fear in his eyes. "It's okay," I whispered. "It's okay. You're going to be fine." He vocalized, long, mournful, the sound carrying through the frozen forest, calling for help that wouldn't come. That couldn't come. I don't know how long I lay there. Minutes, hours. The pain was fading, replaced by cold numbness. I looked up at Silas and saw him as he'd been at the beginning. Tiny, helpless, wrapped in my jacket, with those infant eyes looking up at me with complete trust. "I'm sorry," I said. "I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you better." He made a sound, and then, impossibly, he spoke. The voice was wrong, too deep, shaped by a throat, not designed for human speech, but the words were clear. "Father," he said, "Father, stay." 25 years of listening, learning, never speaking because he'd never needed to. But now, at the end, he found words. "I can't," I whispered. "I'm sorry, I can't stay." "Father, safe. You make safe." Tears froze on my face. "I tried. God, I tried." He curled around me, sharing warmth, protecting me even now, and I realized this was how it ended. Not with escape, not with freedom. But here, in the snow, with the family I'd chosen and who'd chosen me. I heard voices in the distance. The search teams had found us. I tried to tell Silas to run, but the words wouldn't come. The last thing I remember was his amber eyes watching me and the sound of helicopters overhead. I'm writing this from a hospital bed in Marquette. They found me 3 hours after my heart attack, hypothermic but alive. Silas was gone. Tracks leading north showed he'd stayed with me until he heard the search teams, then fled. They lost his trail in a creek bed 10 miles from where I collapsed. Morrison visited me yesterday, told me they're still looking. They've expanded the search grid to 200 square miles, brought in additional resources, set up permanent monitoring stations. They believe Silas is still in the area, that the bond between us will draw him back. They want to use me as bait, set me up at the cabin, wait for him to return, take him when he does. I told them no. "Mr. Calder, you're being irrational," Morrison said. "That creature is a scientific impossibility. It could answer fundamental questions about evolution, biology, the development of intelligence. You can't possibly understand what you're throwing away." "I understand exactly what I'm throwing away," I said. "The same thing you want to take. his freedom, his life, his right to exist on his own terms instead of yours. It's not human, Mr. Calder. No, I agreed. He's not human. He's better than human. He's loyal, compassionate, intelligent, everything we claim to value and so rarely demonstrate. And you want to lock him in a cage and call it science. She left angry. But I know they won't stop. They'll keep searching. They'll find him eventually. Something that large, that unique. They'll find him. Unless he's learned enough from 25 years with me to stay invisible. Unless he's smart enough to avoid detection, to survive in true wilderness, to become what the legends describe. A shadow in the forest. A story hunters tell but can't prove. I hope he is. God, I hope he's that smart. My nephew James came to visit me yesterday. I gave him the journals, the photographs, the DNA samples, everything. If something happens to me, I told him, don't publish these, don't turn them over to authorities, just know that they exist. Know that this happened, that for 25 years I had family. Strange, impossible, but real. He promised he would. I'm going home tomorrow, against medical advice, but I don't care. If I'm dying, and the doctors say the next heart attack will probably be the last, I want to die in my cabin. In the place Silas and I called home. Maybe he'll come back. Maybe he's smart enough to know I can't hurt him anymore, that I never wanted to. Maybe he'll appear at the tree line one last time, and I'll get to say goodbye properly. Or maybe he's gone forever. Learned the lesson I should have taught from the beginning. Humans can't be trusted, even the ones who love you, even the ones who die for you, because in the end, we always choose ourselves. Our curiosity, our need to know, our compulsion to document and classify and control. I didn't choose myself, I chose him, and I'd make the same choice again, knowing how it ends. Here's what I learned. You can't take something wild and make it tame without destroying what makes it special. But you can love something wild, protect it, give it the closest thing to freedom that an impossible world allows. That's not redemption. It's not even enough. But it's something. Intelligence isn't the same as compatibility. Love isn't always enough. But for 25 years, it was enough for us. The wilderness holds secrets. Some have teeth, some have intelligence. Some remember what we did to them, what we took from them, what we couldn't give back no matter how hard we tried. I hear it sometimes, late at night when the medications let me sleep. That mournful howl echoing through the forest. Too deep to be a wolf, too structured to be random. Silas is out there calling to something, maybe to me. Maybe to the ghost of the home we lost. I hope he finds peace. I hope he survives. I hope the wilderness protects him the way I couldn't. And I hope, when my time comes, he knows I loved him. That everything I did, every choice, every sacrifice, every lie, was for him. The wilderness holds secrets. Some have teeth. Some have hearts. Some remember.